I am Jim Collison and live from the Gallup Studios here in Omaha, Nebraska. This is Gallup's Called, the Coach, recorded on July 6th, 2018. Called the Coach is a resource for those who want to help others discover and use their strengths. We have Gallup experts and independent strengths coaches, share tactics, insights, and strategies to help coaches maximize the talent of individuals, teams, and organizations in today around the world. If you have any questions during this live webcast, we do have a chat room that's available for you right below the main video window. Just peek down there. We'd love to have you log in, bottom left-hand corner, choose the guest account, take the name and the number out, put your own name in so we know who you are, and hit submit. You can ask us questions live during the program. If you're listening to the recorded version of this and you'd like to get your questions into us, just use the email address coaching@gallup.com, or there's a contact form right there on the live page. And of course, don't forget to visit the Gallup Strengths Center, just GallupStrengthsCenter.com, for all your Clifton Strengths coaching resources and training needs. You can also catch the video and downloadable audio for offline listening. We call those podcasts, by the way. You can listen to those on your iPhone or Android device. Both now have dedicated podcast app, or you can subscribe to this and get it automatically. All the links for those are available on our coaches blog. Go out to coaching.gallup.com. Jeremy Pietrocini is our host today. Jeremy works as a senior workplace consultant here at Gallup on the Riverfront. Although that's not true, Jeremy. I never see you. Welcome to Called the Coach.
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, good to be on, man. It's been a little while and traveling all over the world. Yeah, technically I'm based on the Omaha Riverfront, but love what I do and get to be with clients all the time. So we're excited to have you guys on today. I know many of you catch our video podcasts or audio podcasts all the time and just want to learn more, expand your thinking, learning of what it means to help people to discover their strengths and be their best. Some of you might be brand new, and so welcome. We're excited to have you. One of the things that you may have realized, or maybe haven't, if you haven't been out to the CliftonStrengths website in a while, is we've got a cool little ticker out there with how many people have completed the CliftonStrengths assessment. And as of today, 18.8 million people. Jim and I were just talking on the pre-show. It's just 5 years ago that we were hoping to hit 10 million. And if you go back in time, Dr. Clifton, when he invented this assessment, had the audacious hopes of reaching 1 million people. So it's pretty awesome that we're quickly, probably by the end of the summer, we'll hit 19 million and 20 million here in the next 12 to 18 months. So pretty awesome. And the cool thing about that, though, is not just people learning their top 5 or learning their strengths, but it's empowering coaches like yourselves to really come alongside those people and help them to be the best version of themselves. So it's Gallup's mission to see 1 billion people, not just 18 or 19 million, but 1 billion people who know their strengths, and 1 million coaches like you and I who are willing to go out and help people be their best. So we're excited to jump in to the conversation today. We've got one of Gallup's external coaches, Michael Dauphinee, who's with us. And some of you maybe heard Mike before. He was actually one of our first 6 on these Called to Coach.
Long time ago,
right? 2013, I think, was the date. But one of our first 6 guests was on a couple summers ago talking about a book he had launched. And we're excited to have you back today, Mike. So thanks for being with us.
Thanks for the invite, Jeremy. It's good to be here.
So real quick background on Michael, and then I'll let him give you a little bit insight too of just kind of the sort of work he does and his journey, again, of being called to coach. But his top 5, because I'll start there. I know that's what often matters most to people, but communication, command, activator, positivity, and woo. And if you're again an expert on strengths and put those in the domains, you go, wait a minute, that's a lot of influencing. Yes, it's a lot of influencing, right? I think even if you go into your top 10, Mike, you're like, we just keep going, man.
Yeah,
changing the world one city at a time. Some of you do it 1 leader at a time. Mike just does it 1 city at a time. So, but those are Mike's top 5. Again, been an expert and enthusiast around strengths for as long as the tool's been around. Now owns and operates his own consulting coaching company, travels the world to do that. But Mike, thanks again, man, for being on. And just, I guess, in your own words, tell us a little bit about your journey of being called a coach and kind of what you do day to day with your business.
Yeah, I mean, I worked for Hewlett-Packard for 6 years as an international negotiator. And I think that kind of started me in the world of business. Never thought I'd be in that, but kind of had gotten into the rut, was doing the 9 to 5 thing, was involved in a nonprofit in San Diego when StrengthsFinder had launched. And no one really knew what StrengthsFinder was. This is around 2000. And we started using StrengthsFinder with our volunteers, and it became the language we spoke. So when I turned 30 and had this moment in my new book, Extraordinary, which comes out September 4th, pre-order on Amazon now. When there's a moment when I remember the day. I remember pulling off the off ramp and onto Rancho Bernardo Drive, heading north on the 15, and was like frustrated and exhausted, and I was kind of insomniac at the time, and just kind of looked in the mirror. I was like, this isn't my life, and decided right now I was gonna make some changes and do some things different. And StrengthsFinder had been something we had just discovered, but interestingly enough, it basically pointed out all the things that were supposed to be my strengths, but I had spent the majority of my life trying to scoop out of me. And so I just was interested in StrengthsFinder. About a year later, I ended up walking away from HP, taking my savings, spending a year traveling the US and Western Europe, just talking about strengths with nonprofits and all kinds of community leaders. And honestly, my hope was that someday I could maybe do workshops and make a full-time living on it. That was gonna be about it. But that was kind of a pipe dream. All my savings was gone. I got a phone call from an inner city nonprofit in Detroit called Eagle Sports that was putting kids in uniformed intramural athletic leagues, and they would also do tutoring. And the director had heard me speak one time and was like, hey, do you do consulting? And I was like, what's a consultant do? He's like, well, coach us. He's like, talk about strengths. And I'm like, okay. And that was my first client. And that was about 12 to 13 years ago now. It depends on how you count it. And one client led to another, which led to another. In the early days, it was just a lot of workshops. I would do StrengthsFinder for groups, and then they'd ask me to coach, and I'd say, no, I don't really know what to do about coaching. I would just teach what StrengthsFinder was, and you get reports. But eventually clients started saying, look, we need someone who can walk with us. We need somebody who can kind of help us answer questions, and we feel like you understand us. Because that's part of the power of StrengthsFinder, right? Is that it accelerates the intimacy. Because we are wired as human beings to resist people who don't know us well. To suddenly have language to things we think, feel, and do, it really kind of magnifies and speeds things up. And so anyway, before I knew it, I was coaching and consulting, and Eagle Sports led to United Way, which led to the Detroit Lions, which led to Fiat Chrysler, which led eventually to some work with San Diego Padres, which led to the U.S. Olympic team, which led to. And so it's now, in the early days, it was mostly just workshops. Now it's coaching. But in the last probably 2 years, I started getting pretty passionate about fragile and conflict-affected environments and seeing if we can take StrengthsFinder to global places. I started to realize that to have the power of this tool in your life, you had to have a credit card and you had to have an internet connection. What would it take to see if the reality of strengths and the transformational power of strengths could work in, what they call international development and in these conflict-affected spaces? And so, been working in Nigeria and Central America, and as well as Afghanistan, about the last couple of years.
Yeah, and I know Paul Allen, who was the founder of Ancestry.com and helped us here at Gallup as our strengths evangelist for a season, just kind of helping launch a lot of our online tools. And I know one of the things that Paul always loved interacting with you and you guys stayed in touch was just kind of the unique diversity of your work. So you've got Fortune 500 companies, you've got, talked about NFL football teams, and then you've got, again, part of it, your own personal mission, passion to want to go to these regions, areas of the world. I know you are right now in Dubai. People who are on the pre-show might have heard us say that, but you're sitting in a hotel in Dubai on your way back from Afghanistan, where I know you travel frequently doing some work there, and some of you
every 5 weeks.
Every 5 weeks, Now, some of it you can talk about, some of it you can't, but talk a little bit more about that. So the uniqueness of, again, kind of the portfolio of work, who your clients are. There's a common need, and you share this of it's. I mean, we can even just say human beings, right? Who want to understand their people or want to understand themselves. Or I like the way you say this too in your website, where you're like, when the world melts down and they need someone to get their back. Okay, we need that communication command activator positivity woo to go.
Totally.
Here we go. Gotcha.
Exactly right.
So talk about just talk about some of the work that you're doing, because I think it's unique. I think a lot of times people have a niche where they work with students or they work with business leaders, but you've got this unique niche that you fill. And again, with some of the work you're doing in Afghanistan, I'd just love for people to hear about it. I know there are people coming to the summit who you're leading a Beyond Borders breakout. So some of them maybe already signed up for that. But tell us a little bit more about that unique work you're doing in Afghanistan.
Yeah, I mean, I think honestly, it's taken me years really to figure out. I mean, you and I've had endless hours of conversation about what exactly is the coaching niche for me and things like that. And I remember a number of years ago, about 2.5, and it really kind of started for me there. I had this guy, and he's a kind of a coach of coaches, and he's like, Mike, so like, describe for me in a paragraph or less what you do. And I'm like, I help people understand their strengths so the team leaders know how to use the right people and put the right people in the right seat to have them be energized and alive. And he's like, that sounds like crap. And I was like, okay. And he's like, I'm like, well, I help people know what their strengths are so they can contribute well to the team. And he's like, that's crap. He's like, why? He's like, why am I going to pay you hundreds upon hundreds of dollars an hour? He's like, what's the bloody neck? And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, you've got to solve the client's problem. He's like, these are executives of the largest company. You've got to know what is the thing that's squirting out of their neck that if you don't do something, they're just going to die. And I remember saying to him, all of a sudden I was like, you know what? People pay me to call me up in the middle of the night to hear me say, I see you, you're not alone, and I'm not scared. Right? And that's kind of it. And so I started realizing that for me, some people are meant to help others with their coaching. Like as a coach, coaches need to know what is their thing. Like, are you someone who's going to develop and grow individuals? Or are you someone who's going to problem solve? Are you going to create innovation? What is that? And so for me, I landed on, I want to help people solve the greatest problems. I want to help people navigate their greatest challenges. And so on my website, we call mission critical support. And so some of that over the years, I got an invitation in 2010 from someone to go to Afghanistan. And I remember them saying to me, well, I'm going to go to Afghanistan and do some leadership. And I remember thinking, what a great opportunity. And they said to me, you are the first person in the world who's ever said this is a great opportunity, great idea. And I thought, this is the pinch point of the world. Like, who wouldn't want to be a part of that? Taught some pretty mediocre leadership, to be honest. It wasn't great. Started going over on my own dime. I spent my own money, and tickets to Afghanistan aren't cheap, and neither is the hassle to get there, but started going a couple times a year. And then eventually started asking, could strengths matter there in a place like Afghanistan that is increasingly more fragile and more conflict affected? And I realized that I had to start with the idea of strength, not strengths finder, which I think gets lost a lot of times. The point of Strengths Finder, where Dr. Clifton created this tool, was about actually getting people to operate in strength, not know what activator means. It wasn't about making people feel really good about their themes. It was about doing something with it.
Yeah, and you kind of alluded to this earlier, Mike. You just used the term language, right? Strengths gives people a language, and you were talking about, I mean, whether that's, again, people that play for the NFL or work in a manufacturing environment. It's like, it gives us a language. But talk about that a little bit, because I know that was one of the challenges. So in Afghanistan, and some people might be familiar, some may not, but you have a multiple language barrier, like just hello, how are you, where's the bathroom language barriers. And then you've got an assessment that, we now have available in 26 languages, but Dari and Farsi, and you're like,
no, not here.
Yeah. So
I remember
about that.
Yeah, so I remember when I was first trying to do this, and so a number of years in the early days, probably 2 or 3 years into my trips, I was working with a small consulting firm, and I said, I'll do strengths with all of you. And they're like, all of us? And I said, yeah, all of you. Even the doorman? And like in Afghanistan, you have a guy who basically, he takes care of things. He's called the Chucky door. And he's your doorman behind the gate, because everyone has walls around their house. And Abdul Ghaffar, which is his real name, but he'll never see this, so it's probably okay. Abdul Ghaffar spoke no English, spoke no Dari. I mean, he actually spoke Dari, but he was functionally illiterate. He could not read, he could not write. So not only could he not read the assessment, he couldn't read and write his own language. But the team got behind this idea that everyone should have a chance to take Strengths Finder. So the office staff got together, they translated Strengths Finder, 177 pairs into questions, and one person was on the computer. One person, they had him printed out, would read him the questions, and he learned to point to one side or the other as quickly as he could, depending on the bubble he want. And they did it that way. It took him 3 people to get it all done. When it was done, what we realized was that this man who was functionally illiterate, who couldn't read nor write in his own language, when we then validated the results through a translator with him, we realized that he had probably the sharpest eye on security and challenges. And that in fact, what I love about strengths is it's the ability to go beyond resume and academic report.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we discriminate so much at times. We don't even realize this based on, well, what have you done before or what have you learned? Strengths was able to give language of value to an individual who didn't have either. He had no educational experience and nothing professional to set him aside. But suddenly in the eyes of the staff, they were like, this is the person who needs to give us a security briefing on the city every day because he knows every person, he's critical, and he's thought it out. And so that language transformed how they saw this individual who literally up until this moment, it took 3 people would have ever taken StrengthsFinder.
Yeah. Do you remember some of his themes? Do you remember?
Yeah. What was the shocking part was it was woo, individualization, analytical.
Okay.
It's kind of that big thing.
Yeah.
And so he knew everybody on the street, Smiley, but questioned every single one. At that time, I'd never seen analytical connected with something as shiny and happy and relationally and social as woo. But he's like, oh yeah. He's like, I can tell you everything, but I also can tell you who's at risk, what's the bomb in the city, and so encourage them to like start listening to him for security. But it was language that transformed.
Love it. Yeah. And I think again, that cool thing, dude, of language is now you're giving, and it's sort of funny, I'm sure you've experienced this too, is I've gone to different parts of the world where they don't speak English. It's for whatever reason, woo always translates as woo. So it's the one thing when they're saying it, I'm like, oh yeah, I know that one.
Well, but the problem is that I was in Kabul doing that. A woman looked up woo. She's like, and she's a very devout Muslim woman. And she's like, woo. And she looked it up, woo, as in to try to win people. She's like, this is not a good theme. I cannot have woo. And I was like, no. Woo means winning others over. Like, it was a little lost in translation sometimes.
Right. Yeah. Well, and what I love about it is, again, it gives people an understanding. I know we use that word a lot too, but it's like a language. When you say something that's again 2 different languages, and we now use a common word, and we go, okay, I now know what you're saying. I understand it. I get it. I may not agree with it, but I understand it. So it's like to understand that this doorman who has a job besides just kind of, it's not again, you're in Afghanistan with security walls. It's not just the happy guy saying welcome to the bank or welcome to the hotel. Right. So part of it is that woo of knowing everybody and welcoming people that want to be welcomed, but the analytical of that skepticism, critical thinking. Hey, this is out of place. This vehicle has been here too long. That understanding for you, for others to go like, all right, are we now leveraging him as part of this team? And I love whoever was the leader there that said, hey, he doesn't read, but can we involve him too? I think that's the inclusiveness of strengths. Yeah. Is everybody has talent, everybody has strength. That was what, like you said, Dr. Clifton believed that. And the assessment was just a means to an end to help accelerate the conversation. So
and I mean, there's something to be said. There's an old quote that I love that says, the beginning of wisdom is to call things by their right name. Yeah. And too many times we love the thought of CliftonStrengths kind of getting to the action. We the definition of talent or patterns of thought, feeling, or behavior that can be productively applied. We focus on the behavior, we ignore the thoughts and the feelings, and realizing that if you start to use the understanding of CliftonStrengths, you can actually put language to what I'm feeling as well as what I'm thinking, which then allows you to navigate differently. But most people will just go, I have a frustration right now, or I have a concern right now, and I don't know how to deal with that. When I have a person's CliftonStrengths in front of me, I deal with generals in fact, we have a challenge with one of the ministries that I work with. I can't talk about what it is, but it's critical to security within the government. We are trying to get
within Afghanistan, you're saying?
Within Afghanistan, yeah. We're trying to get ministers to implement plans of reform and deal with corruption. Well, a lot of times, you can't just sell a plan on its merits because we're dealing in a conflict system, we're dealing in patronage systems. And so I advise a team that was created to advise the ministry. So I had to turn them into coaches. Well, we did strengths with a number of the generals within the ministry. And so now knowing their themes, I keep saying, I'm like, listen, to my consultant guy that I'm coaching, you keep selling the plan with your deliberative, okay? You keep telling him what's gonna happen if he doesn't do it. The problem is the guy you're selling it to, he has significance. We've seen his themes. You need to lean into your futuristic theme because my guy has deliberative and futuristic. I said deliberative is primary, but use futuristic. Tell him how he's gonna be amazing. Sell him on the potential of him implementing this reform and change within the ministry is going to occur because you're appealing to that significance component of him. having that language jump starts and moves you beyond what it would take to win him over and why isn't he listening and what is the issue? Because we have language around his thoughts, feelings, and behavior in a way to positively encourage him to make a change.
Yeah. Yeah. I love, again, and anybody that's sat through a Gallup course, or if you've listened in on a number of these calls, you've heard us talk about when you become aware of your strengths, your top 5, your top 10, even your bottom 5, that ability to self-regulate, kind of dial up or dial down. And I love what you're saying to that individual, like deliberative. It's not that that's not helping him, but he needs to really think differently. Dial up your futuristic to match this person's significant for here's how, if you do this, the impact that it's going to have. And again, it gives them a language to understand the impact of it. So
Mike, let me ask you, as you're dealing with these folks one-on-one, and of course the materials, it's not like you can just bust out the theme and the discovery cards or theme insight cards. Advantage, disadvantage, or is it just a different mode as you're trying to talk about these themes? I can think of where actually getting the cards out of the way. Micah and I spent a bunch of time on Theme Thursday yesterday talking about the value of the cards, but when you don't have them, I could see an advantage to not getting tied up in the definitions, but really focusing on how they work for them, right? Pulling those things. Do you find that to be true when you don't have the crutch of the cards to land on?
I mean, honestly, you can't bring up the cards at all in this setting because it doesn't really, I'm now actually, now that I've been working with this team almost a year, I'm now using a little more of the documentation because they actually have context for it. But in the early days, it was a matter of, trying to get strengths themes down to an essence word. So, futuristic being potential. People with futuristic see potential in everything from meetings to people to, and so when I'm saying to one of my guys, hey, lean into, sell your client the potential of the plan, not the caution of the plan. And so, deliberative being cautious and connectedness being a 360 understanding and, responsibility being ownership. And you almost have to have a language that can directly tie into whatever environment you're in. And see, this is the thing I think for coaches. I had Mr. Clifton, the CEO of Gallup, say to me one time, he's like, "You have the most bizarre portfolio I've ever seen." We were in DC for something, and I met him. He's like, "Hey, you work with who? Like, aren't you just sports or aren't you just banking?" And I was like, "Well, no, because even in international development, what I'm finding is that between problems and someone's really great strategy they created are a whole bunch of people. And too many times we think that strategy simply disseminated will create transformation. And I'm like, information doesn't create transformation. Somebody has to actually coach through the human beings that data passes through their thoughts, feelings, and behaviors a certain way. So coaches have to start to get good at understanding the industries they're in. And you've got to have strengths of the language, but you've got to know that deliberative in the ministry in Afghanistan means one thing, but discipline in the Grand Cherokee factory in Detroit, when the line wants to add a clip to the door on the Grand Cherokee, and it's going to increase their time by 1.2 seconds, and they can't figure out why a high disciplined team like assembly line employees is freaking out over 1.2 seconds. I'm like, because you missed their order. So when I'm talking to corporate, I'm going, you have to convince the disciplined employees on the assembly line that this is actually going to be more efficient. It's not going to change. And it's about rhythm, but it's about knowing the theme so well that you plug and play no matter what the challenge is, but you've got to know it at that level.
Yeah, no, I love that, man. Cause it's using, coming back to that language word, but it's using the language to our advantage. The other thing you mentioned really well, and Jim, you alluded to this with the cards. So again, one of the things that Kurt Leesville kind of blessed not just us, but the world with, of just kind of using his analytical maximizer for Kurt and simplifying how else would we say this? How else would we say we were responsibility? And one of the things I appreciate about you, Mike, and some people know this, but you were my coach even before I joined Gallup, where I kind of had taken this assessment, didn't really know what it meant, did a little Google search.
A long time ago now.
Yeah, it's like 14 years ago. So, but it was interesting with one of the things I know you've shared with me is even before those cards existed, in your own mind as a coach, as a consultant, you were listening for what is it that these people have in common? What is it that I can know about them besides just saying you're intellection? So, but I think that's a piece that people can use those cards to do it, but they can also just over time. But talk about that too. How have you used that alternative, like not the Gallup language, but the alternative? Hey, you might lose sleep because of this, or not even you might. I bet you. Talk about that, or give another story that you've experienced.
Because in the early days, it was a matter of we didn't have the cards, we didn't have those things. We had now discover your strengths, and that was about it. But I remember doing endless amounts of one-on-ones. I mean, endless amounts of one-on-ones in the early years. We would travel the country, and people would there'd be 3 of us, and there'd be anywhere from 20 to 50 people, and everyone would get a one-on-one. And so you could see a lot of folks. And I remember, honestly, in the early days, not even feeling like I knew the themes enough. So I would ask them to describe things to me. And so I remember, you'd talk to somebody and they'd say, well, yeah, so they have relator. And they'd say, I mean, I don't know why I have relator. I'm not friendly. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And then you get another person the same day. Yeah, I'm not friendly, but it's interesting. People tell me things. I don't know why they tell me things. And they kind of would keep going. And by the time you got to person 14 who had relator, you could sit down and say, you know what? Do you ever find that near total strangers tell you too much personal information? Like you say hello, and next thing you know, it's like, hi, how are you? And they're like, and they just want to emotionally vomit all over you. And they're like, how do you know that? And I'm like, because that's what relators actually will say, is that relators project intimacy. But what's fascinating is that as individuals overshare, the rules of mutual disclosure usually kick in, and they realize they've shared too much. And so they're like, okay, relator, I've told you too much. I've told you mine, you tell me yours. And relators are like, no. Because relators are actually extremely private. But honestly, that's not in the material. That just came from me from listening to person after person. I think there's some point at which coaches need to stop talking and start listening.
Yep.
Because everything we need to know, a coach's job is to remove the barriers between the people and the transformation.
Yep.
It's not there to dazzle them with your knowledge of all these themes. It's about knowing when do I need to get out of the way and when do I need to help. And I think you've got to love every theme and you got to know every theme. And there are no opposite themes. There are no themes that are separate like that. And so people will say, I actually had someone last week in Afghanistan say, what's the worst 5 themes? And I'm like, well, okay. They are maximizer like Jeremy has. Like, no, just kidding. But
just gave him my top 5. Yeah.
This is the worst things you could have. And you can get a job at Gallup if you want. It's this reality of getting to a place of saying, you know what, we love them all. And our themes, they're tools in our hands. A scalpel in the hands of a surgeon will save your life.
Yep.
He locked up for just a second. Mike, we'll get you back here. There we go. We lost you for just a second. So you said scalpel, and everybody's watching movies now in Dubai. No, you're fine. We'll get you back here. We lost you right at the sentence. You're talking about a surgeon using a scalpel.
Yeah, I think,
You just do not want to get that sentence out. No.
That's right. Try a different sentence.
Yeah.
We may have to, Mike, we may have to downgrade you. You can hear us. We have to downgrade your video one more time.
Yeah.
In there. We're losing you a little bit.
No problem. I turned my bandwidth down. See if that's better.
Perfect.
So
I can hear you now,
Go ahead.
Let me interject a question. So Steve in the chat room says, do you use that simple approach to go back to the question we were saying about, when you're going cross-cultural and you don't have the resources, or you're not necessarily have a bunch of stuff so that simple approach that you were talking about, do you use that for English speaking too, where for you've got all the materials available? Are you using it in English, or do you approach that different?
When it comes to those themes, I think in English as well, clients need something they can hold on to quickly. Yeah. So you got to put it in their hands, and they've got to have an idea they can just kind of grab hold of. And that's going to end up being key.
Yeah, no, I think the techniques, I think, is something we talk about a lot. Like, how do you customize it? How do you think about it? But I think, like you said, again, language, even in English, how do we help people to figure that out? The one thing I'm interested in too, Mike, and this is something I talk to coaches a lot about when we're talking about how we leverage our strengths. We talked at the opening, your communication, command, activator, positivity, woo. So 4 of those 5 are influencing, positivity. And it's always interesting when have initial discussion with people. Positivity fits under relationship building, but obviously has some influence too. I always say, like the old TV show Cheers, when Norm walks into the bar, the energy goes up. But it is about relationships. And then woo obviously is one of those that is in influencing, but it's about people. How have you seen or leveraged your own strengths to, again, you're injecting yourself really kind of as a foreigner, right? In a different culture, different land. You can grow a beard and try to fit in from a safety perspective.
Sure.
But people know, hey, you're an American.
Sure.
How have you done for people that are working in different cultures? And maybe this is a sneak peek, by the way, too, Mike, into your breakout Beyond Borders, which some people might be a part of. Some of us, it's too late. If you didn't sign up, you be at the summit. But give us maybe some of those nuggets. How do we best, as coaches, and maybe even just talking about how you use your own strengths, and then we could do it ourselves, but how do we adjust to that different culture? How do we begin to, again, win them over or create that credibility where we actually have something to say, to be an advisor and influencer to them?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think I'll save the meat for for the summit, but ultimately, for me, using my own strengths, this is part of what has helped me, is that communication, right? So communication is a theme that ultimately is about narrative. People with communication want to be understood, but ultimately we also see the world in the narrative format. If you think about your English class in high school, you know that every story has like 4 different elements, right? There's a setting, there's characters, there's an arc, there's conflict, and there's closure, right? As these kind of pieces come together. And so I automatically see the world in, okay, who am I talking to? What's the situation they're in? How do they deal with these things? But ultimately, for Central Asian, as well as Central Asian culture, as well as the Middle Eastern culture, I find stories really matter. And so ultimately, having to tell stories has worked out really well for me. In a tribal culture like Central Asia, the thought of being an individual, which we talk about all the time in the US and people love to talk about, is nearly offensive, because the thought of the value of the group is greater than the value of the individual. So I remember trying to talk about strengths my very first time years ago and wondering why they kept staring at me, not realizing that what I said just wasn't landing. You should want to be special. You're unique. You're great. All these things that you said in the early days when you were trying to get people excited about strengths. But instead, I began talking about carpets. I'm starting about rugs. I mean, Afghan rugs are famous around the world. And so I'm like, which is more valuable? A pile of spun lamb's wool colored red on the ground, or a finished perfect rug? And they say, well, the rug, of course. I'd say, great. But what if I pulled out one thread and put the wrong color in right down the middle? I said, so the rug's the most valuable, but the reality is every element matters. Every individual matters. Every individual has the power to decline, to somehow diminish or increase the value of the product that they can understand. And so I think there's a power in, again, having communication themes and influencing themes, and individualization, connectedness. Those themes I have found, if you have those as a talent and a tool, you naturally seem to do really well internationally. And so for me, I've had to lean heavily into that. Whereas before I would go, how much do I know exactly all the stats? But what's fascinating is a lot of, and again, shaped by culture as well as education and experience, when I'm working with Soviet trained generals, highly analytical. And so when I talk to them and I'm saying, and I don't tell them who Gallup is, and I just start spouting stats. And I say, well, it's like, the rarest, the number of people taking strengths fire in the world, or I start quoting the numbers of impact of like this much productivity and this much growth and all these other things. They're like, where? Who says? It's like, how do you know? Because analytical for them, very questioning. And so there's times you got to, and so I have to show up with the details that I wouldn't normally think. But it's about thinking about who am I talking to and how are they listening? Because this is the power that I think for me, I didn't know until I started doing this work in 2010. CliftonStrengths themes, they reveal how we communicate, right? We use them for thought, feeling, and behavior, and we communicate through our natural talents. But here's the crazy part. We listen through our talents as well. And when you start to realize that people listen differently, you've got to understand that, I think I've said before in one of the previous webcasts, communication isn't information sent, it's information received. I've got to think about how my audience is listening and not just make assumptions. And so using communication for me has been huge, but communication so much as more as listening, not so much talking.
Yeah, I love that piece too. Again, for that self-awareness, self-regulation, how do I best prepare? And I think, part of what you just said is kind of public speaking or human interaction 101. Sure. Who's my audience? What do they know? What don't they know? And I love it. We've said this before, time and time again, based on your own strengths, based on your own passions, like global different cultures may not be for you, but for those of us that are passionate about that or invited into that or trying to figure it out, I think that two nuggets you just shared of knowing your audience. So who are they? Knowing the rug analogy, knowing enough about it that you could use it. Not trying to be an expert though. I think one of the things that you do really well is there's courage and confidence. And I think the confidence that I've seen you, Mike, and then also in any of you out there when you're working with other leaders, when you see a confident leader, they're confident not just in who they are, but they're confident in who they're not. So it kind of gets back to when Dr. Clifton would use the star analogy and say there's points and there's gaps. You're like, I'm not from here. I've never made a rug. It's like, but that element of knowing enough about who they are and that vulnerability of who you are and who you're not, that I think it immediately goes, okay, this guy knows us or gets us or wants to know us, and they're more likely to invite you in, which is awesome. So
because you don't have credibility otherwise. I think so. One of the things I remember coming into my first session in government, working in Parliament a number of years ago in Afghanistan, and it's a different contract, a different thing I was doing, and I remember going, well, if you understand your strengths and then focus on strengths with your team, they're going to grow and improve, and it's going to be amazing. And I had one of the directors pull me aside and say, but why would I want that? I was like, well, what do you mean? Of course everybody wants to grow. You want everybody to grow. He's like, well, what if he took my job? Mm-hmm. He's like, this is probably the best job I'm ever going to have. What happened if this person grew and developed? In a fragile environment, the thought of a team growth, the thought of someone outperforming me, you don't plan for succession because you're excited to have a role right now.
Yeah.
And so I had never considered that. And so suddenly all my assumptions that they would be excited for me to give them ways for their people to grow went out the window because they were like, well, that's not what I'm going to grab this for. What are you going to do?
Yeah. Well, I think that goes back to the statement, that you made earlier is where are they bleeding? And, where is the need? And oftentimes we'll come in with kind of some pre-packaged ideas of like, okay, I need to convince you of these things where we really kind of need to say, where's your sticky points? Where are you getting lost? Where are you experiencing pain? Those areas of pain have the greatest need, right? And actually the changes that can be made in the area of greatest pain can have such a lasting effect on our memory and on our brain and what we do and how we see things. And so addressing some of those needs right off, if you have a team that is struggling, it's going to be hard to have any kind of thriving effect on them until you satisfy some of those suffering elements that exist there. I'm sure you've seen that in your work, right? Where people are suffering. When you said, hey, I can't have him take my job, right? All of a sudden you start seeing like, I got to feed my family, right?
Right. And who am I to tell you that you have to care about what I care about? I think that's some of those big shifts is that meeting people. See, it's one thing to want to be someone who spends their life explaining StrengthsFinder. It's another thing to want to be that person's go-to person. Mm-hmm. It depends on what you want to do. Call it coach, call it consultant, whatever, but you're not going to. People are looking for someone to walk with them. They're looking for somebody to kind of walk this road, and you can't do it from the safe seats. You can't. You lose credibility shouting from the shore while your client is in the rapids going, well, don't worry, it's all going to be okay. And they're like, well, that's easy for you. You're up there. I've got a class 5 coming at me. And so I think that's part of, for me, is like I travel 20 plus days a month because I love what I do, but at the same time going, I can't do it, from arm's length. A lot of these clients require you to step in and say, can you be here with me? Can you feel the fear that I'm feeling and still believe that my talent is the best place to start? Because if you can't, then it's all just talk.
Well, and Mike, I think some of what you're hitting on too kind of almost speaks to what I know, and you mentioned this early on. September 4th is the release of your book, Extraordinary. And again, the subtitle of it, "The World Sold You a Map. What you need is a compass." But talk about that a little bit too, because I think part of what even you can pull out nuggets of this with what you've just talked about of our role as coaches, consultants to leaders is even kind of the idea of talent. We have talent, but it's sort of about what do I do with it? I've got a map, but I don't know which direction I'm supposed to head, right? I mean, in the morning for you, you're heading to the airport. Hopefully your Uber driver knows the directions, knows how to get there. Or otherwise you're like, I'm going to miss a flight. So talk a little bit about that. Again, September 4th is when the book's officially released. But I know it's some of your best thoughts, kind of builds off your last book, Identity. But I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that with some of the time we have left.
Yeah, I think part of what I wanted to do, the title Extraordinary, the word extraordinary basically just simply means outside the course of normal events. And so it's this idea that we need to somehow find ways to not just follow the path, the normal course. And I opened the story with the story of my father, who some of you have heard me talk about before, that my dad for years was like, I don't understand what you do, son. Like, I understand what you do for a living. Everyone thinks you work for the CIA. I'm like, no, Dad, I don't work for the CIA. But he said, so we're driving to the airport, and I remember saying, well, here's what it is. And I laid out who I talk to and what I do and CliftonStrengths and all these things. And my dad, who was a blue collar worker, worked at a paper mill his entire life, had a sheetrock business on the side, worked graveyards, worked hard constantly. My dad just quietly drives and he says, so you basically help leaders figure out what their people are good at so they can create a better environment so they don't hate their lives. And I was like, yeah, perfect. Good job. And I remember my dad turned to me and he was like, kind of driving. He's like, you know, dads sometimes say things they don't know it's gonna be deep. And he's like, I wonder what kind of dad I would have been if someone had done that for me. And I was like, thanks, Dad. You know, it's this like moment. It was just like, and he's just driving along deep to deep. And I'm like, I'm kind of wrecked. And I realized, and he never had the options, where he never had the choice. He didn't have anyone to do that for him. But it was funny, is that as I looked at his life, I thought his life wasn't extraordinary. And I talk about this in the book. I have this extraordinary life of travel and hotels and people. And I realized that he somehow hadn't got trapped by events. And see, the profound nature of us is that the world has been so stuck in the rut and so stuck in this course others have followed. They're looking for a way to go beyond navigating towards a direction and understand that there's a destination and focus in on direction. Is that we get too focused in on going to the right city, the right job, the right opportunity, the right thing, and going, wait a minute. CliftonStrengths is a good starting point to understand who I am, but it's only one part of a much larger conversation of a compass that says, if where I'm going has never been mapped, if there's no satellites to track me there, there's no GPS directions, what are 4 values that I can hold together that'll keep me moving in the direction of me? There's no map for it. There's no easy answer. And so identity, permission, courage, and generosity end up being these pieces, but it's about truly having this experience that says, when all else fails and I don't know what to do, as long as, you know, I've seen a person hold a compass and they're hiking and they're kind of doing this, trying to figure out which way is north. I wanted to give people something that I'm like, if you can find these values, if you can understand what it means to know who you are, if you can understand what it means to begin to dream of a life that's possible, if you can somehow close the gap between your dream and your actions, and you can discover with intentionality a world bigger than yourself, it'll change the direction of your life. And you'll let go of, is this moment perfect? Is this moment everything I need it to be? Because the question is, am I moving closer towards being the best version of me? And so, yeah, coming out everywhere books are sold, as they say, September 4th. So,
yeah, and again, just those 4 pieces you just said of identity, permission, courage, and generosity. And I know you've talked about some of that in the past too, and even just that idea of, I think with strengths as coaches, many times we want to help people identify who they are, but those other 3 pieces, and permission, courage, generosity, that if you fast forward to the last piece, I think so many times people are trying to discover their own mission for themselves. Yeah, right. And it's like, no, that's not it's not about you. One of the best-selling books of all time, Purpose Driven Life, the opening line, and if you only read the first sentence, that's enough. It just says it's not about you. It's like the purpose of life. It's not about you. So I think this idea of saying, how do I identify who I am and go on this journey toward generosity and making the world a better place? And, even at the summit this year, again, Jim, we said, we've got the ticker online. So if people are listening live, it's 9 days?
9 days, 10 hours, 54 minutes, I think is where we're at right now.
Yeah. So, but with the Strength Summit, and again, this vision or mission that Gallup has to reach 1 billion people who know their strengths and are living to their strengths. And like you just said, Mike, being the best version of themselves. We have 1 million coaches who are doing that, and we'll have over 1,000, coaches here in Omaha, here 9 days. But it's like the theme this year is empower people, disrupt the workplace, and change the world. Yeah. And I think so much of that is what you're hitting on is how do we help people be the best version of themselves? But those two middle pieces, so identity, permission, courage, generosity. The permission and courage, man. Who said I can go? Who said I can't go? I'm sure there were people the first time you were going to Afghanistan that were like, Mike, you shouldn't go. Crazy. Even if they're going to let you in, you shouldn't do it. You're crazy. And you said you're paying your own dime those first X number of trips that you went.
Yeah, those first 4 years. It was I think it's only been in the last 3 years that I actually ever got paid. Because I just simply, the last chapter of the book is called Follow the Relationship. And if you follow me on social media, you'll see I hashtag Follow the Relationship. Because in all these years of coaching, every client and every opportunity has come because of a person I met and liked. Like, it was all about relationship. It all kind of somehow they got connected. I suck at advertising. I suck at marketing. The reality is it's all been connection. And I can literally track every client in Afghanistan back to that relationship. And coaches will say, well, how do you build a coaching business? And look, you got to do your own thing. You got to know what works for you. But for me, I gave it away. Like, the chance to give it in the early days, you got to charge because people won't value unless you charge. But if you're just getting started, I did living rooms, I did church retreats, I did whatever it took for the chance to meet someone who said, wow, you might have something to offer. Could you maybe come and do it at my workplace? I'm on the board of a nonprofit. Could you come and do it there? And I found, though, that not just as a business strategy, but it changed how I saw the world because I was selling a relationship with other people. And so it's funny for me, identity kicked in and then generosity, but then that changed my permission, meaning how I had vision. And the more I did it, the more I thought I'm stronger than I think I am. I can actually take more risks. I can give myself away different. And so I think there's something about the relationship, but we can't just stop with strengths. Like CliftonStrengths is language. CliftonStrengths is words. So go sing a song with the words. Like, write a poem with the words. But don't just try to dazzle me with what you know about intellection or about learner. Figure out what is that this person needs to hear and help them sing their own song.
Give us a sneak peek too, Mike, on courage. So again, identity, figuring out who we are, permission. Are we waiting for somebody to tell us to go, or do we go, right? Generosity, like make it something bigger than yourself. Sure. But that courage piece, I wonder sometimes, like, things even as coaches, we're like, well, yeah, Mike, you've got command and activator. You're
sure.
We need to dial down your courage, But for other people, I think sometimes there's a sense of courage and confidence that go hand in hand.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit. Give us a sneak peek, maybe even a teaser that makes us want to read that section.
It's like courage is not left on battlefields. The reality is courage is about fear, meeting truth, which then meets action, which then, it's like, that's how you get courage. But here's the challenge, that not every action we take in the face of fear is courageous. What is interesting is it requires, in my opinion, sacrifice. And so what's amazing is the definition of sacrifice is the giving up of something you want for something greater. And so if you start to realize that sacrifice can be found in all kinds of different elements, you can have common courage. Courage comes in talking to, is in spending time with kids that want your attention instead of just kind of prioritizing your own list. Courage comes in making time for a spouse who's exhausted. Courage comes in talking to an employee when you have something else you'd rather do. It's in finding day-to-day moments that will, in some ways, is a sacrificial act putting others first. And there's a great power that comes in calm and courage. And so at the same time, I meet people who will say, I want to change the world, but it's too far out. I can never do that. And I'm like, how are you spending your money? I had a client who was like, man, if I could follow my heart, my strengths, I would work with the Job Corps in Africa. And I was like, well, great. I was like, why don't you go do that? Well, I can't. I have 2 kids. I said, you have spring breaks? Well, I can't. I said, well, your kids won't be there forever. Why don't you start a savings account now so you can have enough money saved that when your kids are gone, you can spend your summer vacation volunteering in Africa with the Peace Corps. What? I said, because see, it's courageous to believe in your vision and dreams now, but are you willing to make the choices about it today? It's not next year. It's not next month. It's today.
Yeah, I love that, man. And then the piece, I know we've kind of shared a little bit too, give me some sneak peeks on some of this. But that piece of, like you just said, we do the I wish I could or someday, and we allow ourselves to kind of get in the way. And I know with that section you just talked about, it really is about overcoming that fear of failure and closing the gap between wishing and doing. It's like you just said, simple thing. Hey, start a savings account that someday you could then step into. It would be huge. So I love it, man. Again, September 4th, it's a release on that. You guys can check it out online, again, Amazon or anywhere else that sells books. But look forward to digging more into that too, man. I think it's going to be awesome to help us be better versions of ourselves as we're trying to do that for our clients as well. So, Jim, any other questions out there from chat or anything else we have? No,
lots of good encouragement going on in the chat room. You've been quoted a couple times already, Mike, on that. You were talking about courage. There's a great quote from that movie Edge of Tomorrow, that came out a couple of years ago. Tom Cruise, and the drill instructor says, or the sergeant says, there's no courage without fear.
Right.
And I just it is one of those principles that we can't. And I think sometimes that risk reward as well as there's those that with the greatest reward also have the greatest amount of risk.
Yeah.
And it's really easy to go, you've got a story, and it's really easy to say, well, of course that happened because you did it. Well, there was no guarantee when you went over to Afghanistan the first time.
Yeah.
Right? That those things.
Right. And for me, like we got a warning 3 nights ago that said, by the way, the Kabul we have intelligence briefs every night. They're like credible threats against the Kabul International Airport, as well as the Ministry of whatever. Please take all necessary measures. Well, the ministry they named was the ministry I work at, and the airport is where I was Wednesday. And there's this moment where you're like, is this really worth it? And there's this weird conversation. How badly do you believe? Like, it's easy to believe it doesn't cost you anything. But I think you've got to find a way that belief supersedes, meaning it's extraordinary. It's above the course of normal experience. You've got to go above that. And if you don't have that belief, do whatever it takes to cultivate a belief in yourself and a calling that not CliftonStrengths, but this focus on strengths can truly change the world.
Yeah. And change people's lives, right? That's what you're doing, is going out there to make each individual better, right? Yeah, to make them better. So great. Jeremy, great to see you again. Welcome back. Good to see you. Thanks for showing up today.
You bet, man. Looks forward to seeing you face to face at the summit.
It's going to be crazy. Just a reminder, July 16th, 17th, and 18th here in Omaha. Mike will be here as well as Jeremy, and we'll be on campus. I think almost 1,300 now registered for that. It's going to be big. We're already a couple hundred, 300-400 more than last year, and we're getting close to selling out. You could still get registered if you want to come out. If you're hearing this now, it's still possible. If those dates haven't passed, you could still join us. CliftonStrengthsSummit.com will remind everyone to take full advantages of all the resources we have available. The Gallup Strength Center, just GallupStrengthsCenter.com. Send us your questions or comments after the fact if you've got those. You can send those in an email. coaching@gallup.com gets to us. There's also a contact form there on the live page. Don't forget, you can catch the recorded audio and video of this program, as well as all the past ones that we've done, including those, the other two, 2013, 2016. If you want to catch those with Michael, they're available for you as well. Head out to the coach's blog, coaching.gallup.com. If you're interested in becoming a Gallup-Certified Strengths Coach, you can see a list of all the courses that lead to that off our courses page, courses.gallup.com. You can also get a 15% discount during our summit if you want to come out and get that done. Jeremy, I think we have 500 people registered now to get some kind of training during the summit. So that has certainly, either before or after, that's been Very, very cool. Join us in our Facebook group if you want to jump out there, facebook.com/groups/call to coach. Lots of great conversation going on there as well. We'll do another call to coach here in a couple more weeks. So thank you for coming out. And if you're listening live, thanks for coming out. If you're listening to the recorded version, thanks for listening. With that, we'll say goodbye, everybody.